Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dawn or Doom, Day 2. I'm pleased to introduce Jocelyn Dunn. Ms. Dunn is currently a PhD candidate in the School of Industrial Engineering at Purdue University. Her doctoral research is focused on creating technologies for data-driven health monitoring and stress management. Using wearable devices that continuously collect data about sleep, diet, and exercise, Ms. Dunn is developing data analytics for dynamically identifying health and stress states. Recently, Dunn has researched the health and stress levels of a simulated astronaut crew as chief scientist for Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. This 8-month mission simulated her enduring academic interest in the health challenges that astronauts face in the extreme environment of space. In 2009, Dunn received a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. In 2011, Dunn completed the master's degree in biomedical engineering from Purdue University with thesis on patented biological scaffold for vascularized tissue repair and replacement. Today she'll be presenting a talk titled Health and Stress Monitoring Throughout a Long Duration. Please silence your electronic devices, but don't put them away. We want to see you tweeting the hashtag Dawn or Doom. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Dunn.
Good morning. Thank you all for attending this talk. I'm going to speak about the dawn or doom of space exploration, and more specifically, the dawn or doom of Mars exploration. Behind me, you see photos from simulated Mars in Hawaii, where I was with 5 others for 8 months, living in this 1,000-square-foot dome. So you can see the day and night of our terrain there on Mauna Loa. And I think the day or night is also part of our dawn or doom theme. When you think about night, there's this inherent kind of fear that human beings have of the night, of being in the dark. But for some of us, when we look at the night sky, it's the dawn feeling as well, the dawn of exploring and figuring out what is our place in this universe, among the hundreds of billions of galaxies out there. So you feel this dawn or doom feeling when you look up at the night sky. And I've always loved looking at the night sky, so it was difficult for me as part of the simulated Mars mission. We could only go outside wearing spacesuits. And with that, you have a helmet with a visor that just has glare and reflection, so you can't see the night sky as clearly. So I'll never lose my appreciation for the night sky again, to be able to see it as clearly as we can now and not have to rely on our cameras to capture images and be able to see the terrain that way. So yeah, you can check out my blog. I was writing throughout the mission about my experiences and our crew's progress during the mission, and I'll still continue blogging as I analyze our data from this mission. So I know a lot of you probably have a bleeding heart like me for space exploration, so I'll get the bad news out of the way and just go for the doom first. So one risk is definitely loss of life in human space exploration. We've had disasters in the past, Apollo 1, Challenger, Columbia. So NASA's primary job is really risk management, to mitigate the risks that astronauts face in this extremely technical and complex challenge of exploring and going at the edge of new frontiers. The other thing we have to worry about is planetary protection. If we go to other worlds and we do find life, we don't want to disturb their ecosystems. And we also don't want to bring anything back that can disturb life and plague our own humanity. So there's international treaties that have been developed in the 50s that globally, all space agencies have to follow these rules and regulations about sample collection and about the way that we conduct these missions so that we don't disturb other planets or our own on the way back. So now the good side, the dawn. So we're at a dawn of space exploration, especially if you think about the commercialization of space. We have SpaceX taking cargo up to the space station, and soon we'll also be taking astronauts as well. And there's a long list of people who are interested in paying for this, so no longer is it going to have to be government-funded national programs. Will be an emerging market that's going to fully develop soon for the commercialization of space. Also, the journey to Mars has all these spin-offs that will become economic valuable businesses that will be based on the technology we develop to be able to live sustainably in the Mars environment. We have to reuse and repurpose all of our resources, and that can help us to live more sustainably on Earth as well. Also have to study teamwork, how to work together and stay happy and cooperative for 3 years that is currently planned for a Mars mission. The other aspect is when you think about health and disease. This atmosphere or the environment of space is a very cruel environment, and you have this accelerated aging process and disease development that can happen as a result of space exploration. So there's tangible and intangible value to why we want to explore space. And these values guide the NASA program's direction and their mission plans. So what I want to start out first with is talking about NASA's pathway to Mars, then dial down to the crew selection and training, and where HI-SEAS, the simulated mission that I was a part of, fits into this, and some of my research as well. And then I'll definitely leave a lot of time for questions at the end too. So here's some background that we need to know to understand the challenge of going to Mars. You can see here in this green orbit, this is low Earth orbit, and that's where the space station is. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said it best, that when you look at a typical school globe in a classroom, that it's just a fingernail away is the space station. It's so close to Earth in this low Earth orbit. And we've gone to the moon before. This is called the cislunar space, the space in between Earth and the moon, and that's about almost like 400,000 kilometers, but the journey to Mars is over 400 million kilometers. So it's many orders of magnitude more difficult to be able to send both the propulsion to get us there and the human challenge of keeping astronauts healthy for the long duration. So the way that we can get there is not going to be just one giant leap. We have to develop these technologies sequentially and do more and more difficult and advanced missions that can help us develop these technologies along the way. So this is the Pathways report from a committee on human space exploration. Our president, Mitch Daniels, co-chaired this committee. And what they found is that this will definitely require international and commercial partnerships, as well as increases in the NASA budget. Currently, it just increases with inflation, and they said it should be plus 2 to 3% per year as well. And the idea is that we're going to move from being Earth-reliant to go on to more intermediate goals, to go to an asteroid, for example, as currently planned. These will go from just hourly or daily scale missions to destinations that can take months to reach, and then eventually to be Earth independent and to be able to sustain your crew for the long duration of a Mars mission. So here's the 12 missions as currently planned. We have the space station that will be, like currently, Scott Kelly is there for a year along with a Russian cosmonaut to study the health effects of being in microgravity for the long duration. And then these are the intermediate proving ground missions that are currently planned to visit asteroids. So those have near-Earth asteroids. They have implications for the security and survival of our species because these asteroids, they've identified so many that are large enough to really have a huge impact on life, just like the dinosaurs, had asteroid impacts that ended their existence. So we need to learn how to deflect asteroids, change their paths, and protect our planet. And then along the way, we'll be developing the propulsion we need and the human life support that we need to eventually go towards the goal of becoming Earth independent and having a trip all the way to Mars and back. So I encourage you all to support NASA's budget increases. This is the current planned trajectory, but it's into the 2030s. We could speed it up a lot if we had more funding. So these are, these are the Indiana congressmen that you can tweet away at, and some of the useful hashtags: Journey to Mars, Fund NASA, Penny for NASA. The idea is that currently we have half a penny on the dollar, or 0.5% of the federal budget goes to NASA. So I used to go to Washington, D.C. and advocate for just give us a penny on the dollar, 1%. So this is, you can see the NASA budget over time, and the Apollo days over 5%, and here we are now quite low. So let's support NASA in that way as well. So here's the capability-driven framework that NASA has moved over from mission-driven technology development to capability-driven, so that no matter the political climate or the goals, how our our values and destinations change, that we still will develop all the capabilities along the way that we need independent of the mission site selection process. So here's, we have to go from a new propulsion to reach beyond that low Earth orbit, and then we'll be able to keep going along this pathway and developing technologies. In these 12 areas are the key areas for capability development, and they've put together these teams to look at different areas, such as the area that I'm most interested in, the crew health and protection. But there's all types of technologies that are needed, gaps that they need to fill in order to make this a possibility of going to Mars and back. And it wouldn't be NASA if they didn't also look at the risks. So here is a table. I don't expect you to see it all, but over 30 risks just in that health and protection category that have been identified as areas that need to be mitigated. And the key is microgravity. Being without gravity, you have bone and muscle deterioration that happens. So this is similar to the aging process of osteoporosis in some ways. And then the radiation exposure can lead to DNA damage that can cause cancer. So this is another important area, is protecting astronauts from radiation, both from the sun and space radiation. And then just the distance from Earth. If you have a medical issue that arises, there's no hospital on the way to Mars. You have to carry everything with you, and you might not know what exactly you will need. And also, prescriptions, they expire, and this is a 3-year mission, and same with the food. You have to have shelf-stable foods and medicines that you can take with you on this long journey. And then the isolation and confinement of it all, that's where high seas fits in, putting us in this isolated, confined environment and seeing what are our behavioral conditions over time. So let's move on to talk about crew selection and training. Even with all these risks, there's still plenty of people who don't even think about it and want to be an astronaut. And if you're in that camp, here's some of the basic requirements you need. I love that this was the 2011 call for applications, and here you can see frequent travel may be required. Yeah, to space. So how great is that? But they also have to travel a lot for their training. So these are kind of the basic requirements. You need to study sciences, physical or life sciences, engineering or math, and then have at least 3 years of related experience, or education can count for that, a master's, PhD. And, or you can instead have flight training. Have good vision, good blood pressure, be the right height. And then there's still no guarantee. If you make it past these requirements and the interview processes, then the next is the astronaut candidate program, which is a several-year program where they do lots of training, some in the water, because with the simulation, it's the best simulation that we have for going out on EVAs, to put them in a neutrally buoyant pool and underwater with the full mock-up of the space station, and they can practice underwater and learn how to support the space station systems. They also have flight training and robotics training. And then after that, they become full astronauts and can be chosen for missions. So for the other aspects of long-duration flight, though, we're not just looking for the best individuals anymore. We're trying to find the best team. It's not just a couple months at the space station anymore. They have to pick candidates who are going to work well and cooperate as a team. So here's some of the behavioral and performance risks that they're trying to avoid, to look for people who are going to be resilient among all the challenges. Being away from your family and friends for such a long time can definitely be stressful. And they want to pick teams that don't have any natural fault lines among the group. So you don't want them to be half military and half civilian, where all the military are engineers and all the civilians are scientists. You want it to kind of mix. So you have none of these natural fault lines within the group when you're looking at crew selection. And then, of course, to be able to handle all of the fatigue and sleep loss that occurs in space, and to be able to control your health and stress, which is where my research comes in, to be able to understand our health and stress in an automated manner, and be able to intervene and help the crew with coordinating their workloads and avoiding some of these what we call adverse behavioral conditions. So for our crew, we had a similar selection process where you apply online to start, And then we went to this backpacking training called the National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming. So there you can see the girls, and here we are on the summit of Mount Geikie. And this was part of our selection process. We had a group of 10 finalists, and then they had to whittle it down to the best 6-person team of the group. And we actually met other astronauts along the way. They were on this similar NOLS course, a little bit longer than ours, practicing their teamwork and outdoor skills as well. So that was a great treat for us to meet some of the real astronauts and be able to talk to them about their job. And then we went on to Hawaii, where we did geology training. This is the 6-person crew. And we did habitat systems training as well before we entered the habitat. So we had really only known each other for about a month or so before we entered the HAB for an 8-month-long mission. So now I'll go on and talk about our mission a bit more. Here's HISES. It's the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. It's the brainchild of Kim Binstead at the University of Hawaii. She has NASA grants to fund this project. There's a series of missions that are looking at our psychological, biological, and social adaptations to this extreme environment of confinement and isolation. It was very crowded in the dome, but also on the list of research projects that we were conducting there. So here is Michigan State. They did sociometer badges I'll show later to measure our social interactions and quantify those. Johns Hopkins, they have a computer game that is able to tell them how cooperative and competitive we are among the group. SIFT is Smart Information Flow Technologies. They have algorithms for text mining that look at our journal entries and based on the adjectives and verbs that we're using to tell our emotional states. Dartmouth develops virtual psychological aids for us so that we have a virtual psychologist on our laptops. And University of Maryland designed our spacesuits. Now Cornell, I'll talk about now when we look at these mission patches. Cornell played a huge role in the food. You see this spork here on the mission patch from 2013. I actually first applied to HISES for this mission, a 4-month mission that was studying Mars food, how to be able to support people's appetite and nutritional requirements without doing the traditional meal ready to eat or MREs that the military has, to have something that's more conventional where you can have separate shelf-stable ingredients and then prepare in a more traditional manner to cook your own meals that fit your tastes. So after after they figured out the food, they got this NASA grant for a series of 3 missions, 4, 8, and 12 months. So I was part of the HISES 3, the 8-month mission. And we're the longest to date in the United States for as an analog simulation of space. But HISES 4, hopefully in sometime next summer, will surpass our record and go on and complete their 1-year mission. So this is where we're located in Hawaii. You can see it's at a high elevation of about 8,200 feet. It's very cold, it's rural and desolate. There's little evidence of any plant life even and animal life around. This is an iron-rich basalt, is the geological term that describes this lava terrain, this lava field. And so we would go out exploring this terrain in our spacesuits. You can see Martha, our commander there, just for a scale. And this was when it was near Christmas time and there was snow on Mauna Loa, the distant, the other volcano there on the big island of Hawaii. So another way that they submerged us in this simulation was by delaying our communications with Earth. So not only did we physically not see anyone, it was also very difficult to talk with our family and friends back home. It took 20 minutes for a message to reach Earth and 20 minutes for it to come back. So at the minimum, we had to wait 40 minutes for a response. And we relied on sustainable energy sources, so primarily solar, for all of our energy. And so these are some of the main factors of our simulation, which I've gone through most of this list, but let me show you the inside. So you can see the confinement very clearly here. These are small little rooms that were 6 little pie-shaped rooms in a row. And this is a panoramic of the inside, so you can see those 6 rooms. And this is the shared space that we used for working out, working, our dining room, and the kitchen is behind that wall, and the laboratory on this side. So it's a total living space of less than 1,000 square feet, a modest 2-bedroom or a larger 1-bedroom apartment shared with 5 other people. So it was definitely confined. So they were isolated, as I showed. We were confined, and we were in extreme living conditions. So we had limited water supply. We could only shower for a total of about 6 minutes per week, 6 to 8 minutes. So we had to do the Navy shower where you turn the water on and off and soap up, and just be very careful that you don't use all of your shower water in one shower. That would be a stress. And so I talked about the shelf-stable ingredients and limited privacy. And for internet, we had some access to social media, but only to post, so that we could continue, speaking about the progress of our mission. But we weren't able to have any websites that update in an immediate manner, because again, if you're millions of miles away, it's going to take about 20 minutes was the estimate for you to receive any of this data. So you have to have static web pages like Wikipedia and things that aren't updating, like CNN.com, for example, wasn't in simulation for us. So here's what our daily activities were like, a photo collage. We worked out a lot because in this confinement, we wanted to make sure we stayed healthy, and that would be a realistic part of being an astronaut as well. You have to work out a lot to keep up your bone and muscle mass, but despite only not having full gravity that you oppose every day. You take it for granted, but just opposing gravity all the time is keeping up your muscle and bone density. And so this is Tony Horton on our Back to Earth celebration. He's the founder of P90X fitness programs, and that was something that we used all the time during our mission, doing these workout videos, and reached out to him sometime during the mission to just explain to him that we feel that he's like our 7th crew member, because we spend an hour or 2 a day with him almost every day. And so he really made our day, our celebration, something extremely special for all of us. A big part was enjoying our meals. There's some homemade ice cream and brownies. So we baked everything from scratch. You had to make your own bread. You can't take bread to Mars. It won't last for 3 years. So you have flour and staples that you make everything yourself. So even in this extremely technical environment, we were learning a lot about old world style cooking. Here's the computer game that I mentioned by Johns Hopkins. You can see there's some saliva samples here. So we would measure our stress before and after playing this game. And then you get team and individual scores. So they're analyzing how we compare our individual interests with our team interests. And we also played a lot of board games just for fun. And those were data too. So Sophie and I, you can see we have the sociometers from Michigan State. And those quantify our proximity to one another, as well as the volume of our voice production, so they can see and quantify all of our social interactions, who's hanging out with who the most, are there any cliques forming, analyze our social dynamics in that manner. And I guess it was Flannel Friday when we took this photo. It's just, I think why we took the photo was because we both had flannel shirts on. And so the other big task was going out exploring Mauna Loa as if we were the first Mars explorers. So we would get some tasks from mission support, go analyze this channel or look at this lava tube. And so this is a measurement device that we used with this line going down to measure the depth of that pit there. And we would collect samples. This is another huge crater there. And looking out at the lava field, it's Commander Martha there. So this was the most astronaut-like thing we did. The most enjoyable part for me was putting on the suit, feeling that physical and mental challenge of exploring like real Mars explorers will do someday. And it wouldn't be complete without some spacesuit selfies. You could see Martha there with the bunny ears. It was Easter. We celebrated a lot of holidays. Yeah. We celebrated a lot of holidays, and Sophie made those bunny ears and decorated our commander there. And yeah, just having some fun, but I could say we weren't always that enthusiastic and happy. So here's some theoretical models about modeling how people's behavior changes over time in isolation and confinement. These theories were developed with crews in Antarctica or underwater in submarines. I'll start first with the green one by Bechtel. It's called the third quarter phenomena. It states that after the halfway point, the novelty or the fun and newness of the mission wears off and people have a tough time psychologically. Until then, they begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel and have an improved psychological state. This one by Rohr, it has 3 phases. In the beginning, it says there's an elevated alertness in this new environment. Then, they studied that people have a feeling of depression and regret for even putting themselves in that position to begin with. And then near the end, this volatility, the emotional highs and lows and unpredictability was the 3rd phase of that model. So ideally, we would want to just be smiley the whole time, but it's important for NASA to think about the risks and the worst cases. And so HI-SEAS is helping to validate or develop new models for the Mars-specific environment about what are the phases that crews go through in this environment. So now I'll explain some ways that you can get spacesuit selfies if you want to participate in analogs. Here's a few others. This is the Desert Research and Technology Studies that are NASA studies near Flagstaff, Arizona. So they study in situ resource utilization, how to get resources out of the rocks that can be useful to astronauts producing oxygen or water sources. And then one in my home state of Florida, it's the only underwater research laboratory in the world. It's called NEMO. And there you can see Dr. Serena Anand. She's underwater, and they're simulating Mars gravity as well. And in this neutrally buoyant underwater analog, you can weight the astronauts to change the buoyancy to simulate different levels of gravity. So with Mars, they would simulate what it would be like with the buoyancy to be the equivalent of 1/3 gravity. And then they can stay for up to 3 weeks, at least 24 hours in NEMO underwater, and crews that simulate what it's like on other planets, asteroids, moon. They can study them all underwater there. This is Hera. It's a newer NASA analog in Texas, and it's smaller than our Mars simulation because ours is like we're already on Mars, whereas this is simulating the journey to Mars. So the participants will enter, they'll feel the sounds and vibrations of takeoff, and then have no contact for a week with mission support. So that's that simulation. MDRS is a long-standing simulation by the Mars Society. These are two-week simulations throughout the year with different crews. And HI-SEAS has just won a grant to study different crew compositions with MDRS missions. So looking at what combination of psychological and professional characteristics will lead to the most high-performing crew. And you can do that more quickly with a 2-week mission, a higher turnover rate. FMARS is in Canada. It's also by the Mars Society. It's very, very far northern Canada. Our mission director was part of FMARS a number of years ago, and she told us that out on EVAs, they actually have to bring firearms along with them in case they have a ferocious bear encounter along the way, some alien bears there in northern Canada. So they also are planning for a full year, 365-day mission, and they had to delay that because they don't have enough funding. The Mars Society is a group of citizens interested in space, so if you're feeling generous, you can donate to help them get their full-year mission off the ground. And Mars 500, this is the longest globally. HI-SEAS is the longest duration mission in the United States, but for 520 days, 6 men stayed in this indoor facility in Moscow as a simulated Mars experiment. And that's actually part of the inspiration for my research. Part of the motivation is that they reported that 85% of their conflicts involved crew members who in their daily surveys said that they had high levels of stress and exhaustion on those days. So it shows that stress and exhaustion can really be more than a physical impact on yourself, but it also can impact your relationships around you. So it's important that we can understand stress on a deeper level, and that's what I'm working on for my dissertation here at Purdue. So first, let's look at some of the stressors. If we're going to study stress, we have to know what's causing stress. One that we talked about as a group is just being confined to your social situation is a huge stress. You can't get away from for the weekend and then come back to your dome family. You're constantly together and confined. So here you can see the overhead image of the hab. This is the second floor with our rooms and the floor plan below. And this is a dashboard we use to monitor our resources. So you can see the battery charge, the water levels, the weather outside with our weather station. And here I just pulled a weather report to show that sometimes we would have weeks where we barely saw the sun. What's the problem with that? Well, we rely on solar power, so we needed the sun in order to do all of our plans for the week, and we wouldn't have hot water, we couldn't heat the place. There was a lot of stress that would come just based on the weather. Also, the food restrictions, both not having fresh food, we had an indoor garden, but the majority of our food were freeze-dried ingredients, and we also would run out of things at times. We never were hungry where we didn't have any food, but we lost some variety along the way. And then the communication delay, I mentioned there's no spontaneity in your conversations with your friends and family back home. It's almost the affect of sending a letter where you don't get a reply for so long, so it feels like a one-way communication in a way. And then the lack of privacy. So just having these lightweight materials to make the dome means there's not a lot of soundproofing. So even when you're alone in your room, you still hear everything else going on in the rest of the habitat, so you can't get away, and you feel like you don't have a lot of privacy because there's cameras on the ground floor monitoring everything you do. They're collecting data about us in every single way. And the other is the media actually is a huge stress. They ask a lot of questions, and we're constantly producing content for media. And that was another huge impact on our stress and our privacy. So this is the Martian movie. I hope all of you have heard about it. It's coming into theaters soon, or maybe have even read Andy Weir's book. And I think they did a great job of explaining the stressors that real astronauts would feel on a mission to Mars. And the thing is, this guy has a thumbs up, and that's what researchers get a lot of times from the astronauts. Everything's good, we're fine. They have all the incentive in the world to not tell the truth about the stress and exhaustion they're feeling, because they want to go out on that next spacewalk. They want to be chosen for the next mission as well. Whereas we don't have that vested interest, and we can be honest with the researchers about the challenges of being in this environment. And the other thing is, this is a great opportunity to study some of the real stresses that we face, but not that we can't quantify exactly in our real world. It's full of different restaurants and foods and events and all the communication, the texting, how all of these things impact us is still an area of mystery for researchers. How does it all connect over the time course? These acute stresses, how do they accumulate over time and lead to adverse behavioral and health conditions? So in this limited environment of high seas, we're able to study many different contexts. We can look at our physiology. For 8 months, I was collecting urine and hair samples to analyze our stress hormones and our health states, and then we're also taking biometrics all the time. So I work with wearable device data. We had wristbands and biometric shirts that were quantifying our physiology along the way and our behavior. So we can look at our sleep and activity levels. We are also taking our emotional states through filling out surveys that would explain how we perceive our stress level to compare with what the data show, but how do you think about it? How do you feel? And then, of course, the dashboard I showed you is collecting data all the time about our weather and resource states. And in the real world, it just wouldn't be possible to collect all this information about a person. So for 8 months, this is a very valuable data source that we can then understand people's health and stress, both to help astronauts and also to look toward developing technologies that are useful to citizens on Earth. The other thing is stress is part of the chronic disease processes that we know occur. So for our ancestors, the fight or flight response would result in elevated glucose to help us to flee or fight a predator, maybe a saber-toothed tiger. But that's not as useful when you're feeling stressed at your computer and you're just in this sedentary state. So the elevated glucose can lead to inflammation. That is one of the main processes in diseases like heart disease, having chronic inflammation of your blood vessels. So if we can understand stress, we can understand some of the disease development processes that are so prevalent in our society today, and an increasing challenge for for human beings who are having more and more connection all day long with these social media and all of our work deadlines, and we just have increasing amounts of stress in our culture. And so how can we have management that's useful and can help our stress as well as our relationships? So we can look at this at different time scales. Currently on the market, there's lots of wearable devices, well, not lots, but there's several wearable devices that can measure real-time stress by looking at the galvanic skin response, or like the sweaty palms you get when you're nervous, and then heart rate variability. The variability in your heart rate over time is also an indicator of stress. But there's not a lot that can look at more short-term, medium-term measures of your stress to help you understand how your behavior is putting you in maybe some of these feedback loops where your behavior is getting into this negative feedback where you need to intervene and have some way to get you off that stressful, unhealthy state and back into a more productive system. So that's why we're analyzing this as a system, as a human integrated system, to look at the physiological, emotional, environmental, behavioral, all of these context over the long duration of 8 months. We have data from different timescales and contexts. So this is the recap of my talk. We want to get Earth independence, and that's a dawn because we currently our pace of use of resources is outpacing what we can support on Earth. So Peter Diamandis writes about the time of abundance that the space program will bring to us, a time where we'll be harvesting resources from space, and he's saying, get ready for a time of abundance, no more doom and gloom. The space program is going to solve a lot of the issues we have. Team performance, the study of the relationships that we have on a crew to over time for 3 years to stay cooperative. In our culture, we have increasing divorce rates. We have financial hardship and emotional hardship as a result. So if we can understand how to better support our relationships on a Mars crew, we can also use some of these conflict management and debriefing methods at home as well. And then health and stress. So studying the aging and disease processes to develop technologies and biomedical methods that will help us both keep astronauts safe and again on Earth. So with that, I'm glad to take your questions, and thank you again for attending my talk. And if you want, you can come to the front and use this mic, or I'll bring it around. Anyone? Yep, okay.
Happy to start. Got a lot of questions about the food.
Okay. I don't know if it's... Maybe just a little closer.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I think it's working now? Yeah.
Yep.
And so that, a lot of questions about the food. Before you went in, were there special attempts made to balance the diet in certain nutritional ways, certain amount of protein, carbohydrate, et cetera?
So they didn't tell us what we had to eat every day, but with that first food study, they showed that with the ingredients they gave us, we could have nutritionally all the things that we would need and not have deficiencies develop over time. But they didn't regulate our meals like they did in the first food study, and they provide us any supplements we need as well.
Were there certain sources of protein that you had, for example?
Yeah, so for protein, we had freeze-dried meats and tofu. So the freeze-dried meats are like diced chicken, ground beef, pork, diced ham, and they're just like crumbles in a way, and then you add water, and it becomes like normal chicken. Yeah,
and did anybody ever try to do totally vegetarian?
None of us did vegetarian, but we had gluten-free on the crew as a dietary restriction.
Cool. So trendy.
Yeah.
Even on Mars, right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was, she actually has intolerance.
Just joking.
But yeah, it is.
Just
trendy.
one final question, I'll turn it over. When you were out doing the exploring, were efforts made to like mine certain things like you would try to use in situ resources?
Yes, we especially looked at building structures, which type of lava would be useful for building a shelter that we would need to, in the event of a solar storm or a radiation storm, where we could build shelters underground or with these materials, build other habitats. We didn't actually have like MOXIE, like to extract oxygen from the rocks, but we would measure the composition, the mineral characteristics, and characterize it in that way. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand High Seas has a pretty high focus on the human factors and behavioral studies. Sometime in the next 20 years, when that well has run dry, do you expect High Seas to be able to pivot to the more technology and exploration tactics focus, more in the way that MDRS and FMARS does?
So in the pit that runs dry, can you explain? Do you mean like when we have humans figured out and we don't need to worry about the relationships?
Well, presumably, there's not 20 years more worth of exclusively human factors research necessary before we can start sending humans on this path. I understand why we need to focus on it now, since we haven't developed the technology to test yet. But it does seem like eventually we need to pivot towards focusing on exploration tactics and the technologies we're actually going to bring with us to Mars, and developing the strategies to use them. Again, in the same way that MDRS and FMARS have been focusing on for the last 15 years. Do you expect High Seas to play a bigger role in that once it has more thoroughly explored the parameter space of human behavioral studies?
Yeah, I think they're going to increasingly look at EVA, spacewalk kind of technology, communication protocols. How do you coordinate the human factors of exploration as well? But there's a lot going on in Hawaii in the same area that they are looking at how to use the resources, studying this analog for the terrain, and studying the technological kind of research and technology studies going on in the area. But the main, like, why High Seas was developed was to study the human cognitive and behavioral aspects. So in the future, I mean, it's there so people can write grants to use it. There's a lot of HERO grant applications that require space analogs, so you can propose studies that would use this analog in useful ways. But for now, the NASA grants support, as you said, like the health and behavioral. But there is a lot of technology studies that are just focusing on how do we use the resources and how do we characterize the geology of the area.
You talked about having saliva test and hair test and all these devices. Now my question is, was there a starting point that you did before you got into the facility? Did you start before to kind of have a starting point?
Yeah.
And then was there a continuation after you got out and went home to see, you know, how it had gone back to, if you want to say, the normal levels?
Right. So we only knew that we were selected for, are you going next? Okay, yeah. So we only knew about the selection about 2 months before we entered the habitat. And a lot of studies of astronauts at the ISS, they've shown that the first data point is almost like an outlier because there's so much stress in preparing for the mission. So we do have data from the very beginning, but we don't look at that in the same way as the health and stress throughout the mission. That's more due to the mission itself, as far as instead of the preparation that you have in the beginning. And we have a lot of surveys that we're continuing now for the next year. So we have to answer some surveys intermittently about how we feel about our group today versus when we were in the habitat. Are we still talking? Those kinds of things they're studying, but not biological sampling anymore.
I had 2 quick questions. I was curious what kinds of conflicts emerged within the team, and then is that a window? I'm just wondering if you had a view out.
Yes. So there were conflicts that arise. One thing that we have to be careful about when we talk about our conflicts is that we are under the rules of the Institutional Review Board, so they have to protect our privacy and identity. So when I can't like give you any kind of gossip kinds of things about the conflicts, but it's such a long period of time, and that's why they're studying it, because they know that conflict will inevitably come up in the group for such a long period of time. So one way that we dealt with it a lot was through working out together. Sometimes if someone was frustrating you, or you were just having your own personal kind of stress going on with things in the outside world, when you work out, by the end of the workout, you almost just forget what was bothering you a couple hours earlier. So that was one way we really dealt with our stress. And yeah, looking out the window, there's this one had our garden in front of it, so we really couldn't see it, but there was another window on the other side looking out at Mauna Loa. And when I was stressed, often we had our treadmill set up right in front of there, and I would pretend like I was running away, even though I wasn't going anywhere at all. So yeah, those questions go together beautifully.
What would you say was your biggest stress?
I think my biggest stress was actually the social kind of entertainment. I thought, I'm being isolated from the rest of the world, right? So I'm going to read all of these books. I'm going to just be completely work-focused. And it turns out that you're isolated from the rest of the world, but you're confined to your own social situation. So you still have the same peer pressure of, let's go watch a movie, let's play games, so there was still all those distractions, but even more intense because they're right there with you. You can't get away. So I think that was my biggest stress. I guess I'm more introverted than I realized. I need my space.
Well, you just mentioned books. Did you and everybody bring like lots of books and swap them throughout the course of the time frame?
Yeah, we had like a digital library of tons of books. So we would share. I have terabytes of stuff that I didn't have before, books and movies, and we would share all those files to keep us entertained. I brought 8 books, like physical books, along with me, and I only read 2 of them. So not as much reading time as expected.
I had 2 questions besides that. You said you could hear everything at night, snoring, whatever. Were earplugs pretty common?
Yeah, especially, I would use earplugs even during the day sometimes because there was a lot of cooking that we had to do during the afternoons because that was when the sun was out and producing the most energy. And so there could be loud pots and pans and all the things going on. So I would often do earplugs and then headphones with music so that I could completely, noise canceling, but extreme noise canceling.
And then my last question was more scientific. You mentioned in your talk about how weather affected you quite a bit, and I was assuming you're talking about Earth weather there with not being able to have sunlight for your solar. From what we know of Mars, how does that compare? Would you face the same kinds of things, weather patterns up there?
Yeah.
And how would that affect the solar part?
Yeah. The main weather threat that they have are dust storms, which can definitely have an impact on the amount of sunlight that's getting to the solar arrays to produce their power. And they have even less sunlight than we have. They're a bit further away from the sun. So I could see that weather being an extreme factor on them as well. They also have radiation storms to worry about that we didn't have to. We simulated one where we went through our emergency protocols and took cover in a nearby, it's called a lava tube. It's basically like an underground cave where the lava once flowed through. And so we took cover under there to shelter us from the radiation storm. So that would be another type of weather that we just simulated, but real astronauts will face this true hazard of.
Here. This is going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm actually not. It seems like it would make a great reality show and perhaps very educational and build public support. Did you guys ever discuss that?
Right. Our mission director has had lots of producers come to her and say, hey, can we make a reality show out of your simulation? But the thing is, like I mentioned, the Institutional Review Board, so as a research project that's not allowed, you have to protect the identity and confidentiality of the participants. So as a research project, it's not possible. But the Mars One project is intended to, by the Dutch entrepreneurs, is intended to be funding a one-way mission to Mars based on a reality show, the money that they can get from it. So as long as it's not a research project, you could do something like that. I think it would be a pretty boring show, to be honest. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Any others? Yeah.
What would radiation storms do to your equipment?
Right. Yeah, you have to have electronics that are rad hard, is what they call it. So basically, you could have for some things, it might not be worth it to go through that. It's very expensive, and it takes a lot of resource to make all of your equipment rad hard. So you could just have a lot of replacements as well as another way to deal with it. But a lot of people make comments about how the electronics on the space station or the shuttle were like so old, but the reason why is because they had to make them rad hard and go through that process. So a lot of, like when I talked about the wearable devices with some of the NASA researchers, they're like, well, they're so lightweight and everything, we'd probably just send them, multiple, and then they can have it in a protected area and just have redundancy as another way.
Tell us about Zach's 3D printer.
Okay. So Zach, for his research, I did health and stress states. He did 3D printing. So the idea there is that you want to be able to make parts on the fly. If you're on your way to Mars and something breaks, you can't wait 8 months for the resupply to make it there, or it might just be infeasible for them to send what you need. So they can send instead the plan of the part you make and you need, and then you can make it there yourself. So we had a made-in-space 3D printer there in the habitat, and we were able to make things to fix our dishwasher one time, fix watch bands. We did different immediate repairs, and also made some fun things like models of our habitat to send to K through 12 students, and made toys and game parts. So it was great to have that. Thank you for asking. Right. Do you have an? Oh, same question. Great. Yeah. So.
So after 8 months, any desire to go for real?
Yes, I went into the simulation unsure. I thought 3 years. Wow, that's such a sacrifice. But the months really flew by, and it kind of made time seem more relative to me. When you're doing something that you feel is valuable and meaningful, time just flies by. And going out in the spacesuit and feeling what it would be like to explore Mars made me realize, like, hey, I'm ready. Let's do it. I want to definitely apply for the next astronaut selection and see where it goes. And then with commercial space, a lot of opportunities are emerging as well. So it's a positive.
Kind of a follow-up question. Are you interested in going and coming back, or are you interested in
Yes.
staying?
Yes. I'm interested in going and coming back at this stage of my life. I'm not ready to say goodbye to Earth, but if I were maybe older, there's some people that say you should send an aged crew, actually, because it wouldn't be such a detriment on your quality of life later. So if you do develop, say, cancer, and you're a 40-year-old astronaut, that's taking a lot off your lifespan, whereas if you sent an older crew, then it wouldn't take so much off their life. All right, seems like we wrapped it up. Thank you.